You've been told that psychological healing transforms you into something gentle, something open, something that radiates unconditional acceptance toward everyone who crosses your path. This is a comfortable lie. Carl Jung spent decades documenting what actually happens when an empath integrates their shadow, and the reality is far more severe than the mythology suggests. A fully integrated empath doesn't become more accessible. They become operationally dangerous to anyone who mistakes awareness for weakness, not through aggression, through immunity, and that immunity dismantles entire systems of social control that depend on your unconscious participation. Let me show you what Jung actually observed in the clinical transformation from fragmented sensitivity to integrated psychological sovereignty. Before integration, the empath exists in what Jung identified as a state of permanent psychic porosity. Your nervous system operates without filters. You register emotional frequencies that others cannot detect. The anxiety in a room before anyone speaks, the hostility beneath polite conversation, the depression someone carries but never names. This isn't mysticism. This is differentiated perception developed through survival necessity. You learn to read micro-expressions, vocal inflections, and behavioral inconsistencies because your early environment required it. Perhaps you had a parent whose mood determined whether the day would be safe or chaotic. Perhaps you navigated family systems where spoken words contradicted emotional reality. You developed perceptual acuity the way soldiers develop threat detection through repeated exposure to environments where missing signals had consequences. But here's what that survival adaptation cost you. While your perception sharpened, your boundaries dissolved. You began to experience what Jung called unconscious participation, the inability to distinguish between your emotional content and the emotional content of those around you. You walked into a room and absorbed the collective emotional material of everyone present, their rage, their grief, their unprocessed trauma. All of it flooded your system as if it were your own. You didn't choose this. Your psyche was structured to be receptive, and in the absence of individuation, receptivity became indiscriminate consumption. You consumed other people's shadow material because you had no framework for understanding that their darkness was not yours to carry. The unhealed empath constructs their entire identity around this absorption. You believed your purpose was to metabolize other people's pain. You became the family therapist at 12, the friend who always understood at 16, the partner who could hold space for anything at 25. And with each role, you buried yourself deeper under layers of borrowed suffering. You had no boundaries because boundaries felt like rejection. You had no limits because limits felt like abandonment. You said yes when your body screamed no. You stayed when every instinct told you to leave. You smiled through your own disintegration because you believed your worth was measured by your capacity to endure what others could not. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly. Empaths who arrived in his practice weren't presenting with classic pathology. They were drowning in psychological material that didn't originate from their own unconscious. They were living repositories for collective shadow, denied aggression, repressed sexuality, unacknowledged shame. Consider what this does to your sense of self. When you spend years absorbing external emotional content, you lose contact with your internal reality. You can read everyone except yourself. You know what others feel but cannot name your own emotional state. You become a sophisticated psychological instrument pointed outward with no internal calibration. This is the pre-integration state: maximum perception, zero protection, complete self-abandonment disguised as compassion. Jung understood that most people don't choose individuation, They are forced into it through crisis. For the empath, this crisis usually arrives as betrayal, not ordinary disappointment, but betrayal that shatters your operating system. It's often the person you protected most, the one you absorbed pain for, the one you believed would never exploit your openness. And then you discover the truth. They've been using your empathy as a resource. That moment is critical, not because it breaks you, but because it forces a choice. You can continue absorbing and explaining away what you know is true. Or you can trust what you always sensed but refused to acknowledge. Jung called this the encounter with the shadow. For the empath, it means confronting your suppressed rage, your denied aggression, your capacity for severance. The qualities you were taught to label as cruel or selfish are actually the parts waiting to restore balance. Integration is not gentle. You don't integrate your shadow through affirmations. You integrate it by acknowledging that every time you override your instincts to preserve someone else's comfort, you commit self-violence. The breaking point comes when you stop doing that, when you look at the person who betrayed you and feel clarity instead of compulsion. No urge to fix, no need to understand, just precision. After that point, healing doesn't look like softness. You sharpen. Integration means reclaiming everything you suppressed. Your intelligence, your discernment, your willingness to walk away, your capacity to identify manipulation early. Jung documented 3 stages in this transformation. Stage 1, cessation of absorption. You stop being a container for other people's emotional waste. You observe emotion without internalizing it. When someone projects guilt or rage, you don't absorb it. You let it return to them. Manipulation collapses when there is nowhere for it to land. Stage 2, radical selectivity. You become intentionally selective about who accesses your inner world, not defensive. Strategic. You reserve depth for people who demonstrate responsibility, boundaries, and self-awareness. For everyone else, you are simply unavailable. Stage 3, predictive clarity. You trust the data your system has collected for decades. You no longer second guess your perception. You see patterns before they unfold. You recognize manipulation before it forms. What makes the integrated empath powerful is not the ability to manipulate, but the ethical refusal to do so. You understand human psychology deeply, yet choose integrity over control. When this integration completes, dysfunctional systems collapse. Not because you attack them, but because you stop holding them together. Relationships either deepen through honesty or dissolve through exposure. You stop defending yourself. You stop explaining. You watch reactions and make decisions based on clarity, not emotion. This is individuation. Not innocence, but sovereignty. You become immune to guilt, resistant to manipulation, grounded in self-respect. Healing doesn't return you to who you were. It advances you into someone capable, awake, and self-possessed. You are not less sensitive, you are consciously sensitive. Your breaking point was your initiation. Your empathy is your instrument, and now that you wield it with boundaries, you are unreachable by unconscious systems. This is what Jung observed, not softness, not endless openness, but awareness with precision, compassion with limits, empathy with sovereignty. Protecting your peace isn't selfish. Walking away isn't weakness. Choosing yourself is the foundation of every healthy relationship you will ever build. This is what a healed empath becomes.